The year was 1877, when the vast Oklahoma Territory stretched before settlers like an ocean of grass, promising new beginnings for those brave enough to stake their claim. In these untamed plains, where summer brought scorching heat and violent storms, courage was measured by perseverance, and kindness was as precious as water itself. This is the extraordinary tale of Eliza Blackwood, a young homesteader with a gift for understanding plants and healing, and Swift River, a Half-Kiowa rancher whose tracking abilities were legendary across the territory. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The summer of 1877 descended upon the Oklahoma plains with merciless heat. From horizon to horizon, the landscape shimmered under the relentless sun, tall grasses bending in waves with each hot breeze. Those who had survived previous summers knew to respect the sudden violence of prairie storms, the danger of flash floods, and the terrifying power of stampeding cattle when lightning split the sky. In the small settlement of Redstone Creek, the homesteaders worked from dawn to dusk, tending crops, mending fences, and preparing for the upcoming cattle drives that would thunder across nearby grazing lands. Most families huddled in their modest cabins during the worst heat of the day, telling stories to pass the time until the cooler evening hours permitted work to resume. All except for one figure that moved purposefully through the tall grass at the edge of the settlement, gathering plants in a woven basket. Eliza Blackwood paused to wipe the perspiration from her brow, her honey-brown hair escaping its practical braid. At 16, her face still held youthful softness, though responsibility had added a seriousness to her blue eyes that girls her age rarely showed. Her skin had tanned from countless hours working the land alongside her father and younger brothers. Yarrow for fever, echinacea for infection, willow bark for pain, she whispered to herself, identifying each plant with the knowledge passed down from her grandmother. Since her mother's death from childbirth fever 2 years prior, Eliza had taken on the role of healer for both her family and increasingly for neighbors who recognized her gift. The Blackwood homestead sat a mile from the main settlement, a sturdy cabin with a good well and thriving vegetable garden that testified to Eliza's care. Her father, Thomas Blackwood, had chosen the location for its proximity to a small stream that rarely ran dry, even in the harshest summers. As a former schoolteacher from Illinois, he had brought books west along with farming implements, determined that his children would have education alongside frontier skills. As Eliza made her way back toward home, she noticed a cloud of dust rising from the direction of the cattle trail. The first of the season's drives was moving through, thousands of longhorns heading north to the Kansas railheads. The sight was both impressive and concerning. The Blackwood homestead lay close enough to the trail that a stampede could destroy everything they had built. At the cabin, Eliza found her father consulting with 2 neighboring homesteaders, their expressions grim as they studied a crude map spread across the table. "The ranchers say they can't alter the trail this year," Samuel Jenkins was saying, his weather-beaten face furrowed with worry. "With the drought pushing east, they need the water access this route provides. But they've always kept a wider berth." "From the settlement," Thomas Blackwood replied, running a hand through his graying hair. "Putting 2,000 cattle within a quarter-mile of our homes and crops is asking for disaster." Eliza set her basket down quietly, but her father noticed her presence immediately. "Eliza, good timing. Mr. Jenkins and Mr. Cooper were just discussing the cattle drive. Apparently, the Broken Spur outfit will be bringing their herd through tomorrow, much closer to our properties than usual." James Cooper, whose homestead lay even closer to the trail than the Blackwoods, shook his head. "It's that new trail boss, Dalton, nothing but contempt for settlers, says we're in his way, not the other way around." "We've worked too hard to have everything trampled," Thomas said firmly. I think we should ride out and meet them before they get too close, see if we can negotiate." Eliza's younger brothers, 10-year-old William and 8-year-old Henry, had been listening from the corner, eyes wide with excitement at the mention of the cattle drive. "Can we see the longhorns, Pa?" William asked eagerly. "Not this time," Thomas replied. "I want you boys staying close to home until the herd has passed." He turned to Eliza. "That goes for you too. No gathering plants beyond the garden until the drive is well north of us." Eliza nodded, though inwardly she chafed at the restriction. Her healing supplies needed constant replenishment, and several of the most effective plants grew only near the creek that now lay in the path of the approaching herd. The next morning dawned hot and still, with an oppressive weight to the air that experienced plainsmen recognized as the harbinger of a storm. Thomas Blackwood rode out with 5 other settlers to intercept the broken spur outfit before they reached the critical point where the trail came closest to the homesteads. "I'll be back by midday," he told Eliza as he mounted his sturdy gelding. "Keep the boys close, and if you see storm clouds gathering, get everyone into the root cellar immediately." "Yes, Pa," Eliza promised, handing him a small packet of jerky and cornbread. But as she watched him ride away, a sense of unease settled over her that had nothing to do with the approaching cattle or the threatening weather. By mid-morning, the stillness had become almost unbearable. No birds sang, no insects buzzed, and even the ever-present prairie wind had died away. Eliza kept the boys occupied with lessons, but her attention continually drifted to the western horizon, where dark clouds were beginning to build. When noon passed with no sign of her father's return, Eliza's concern deepened. The boys were restless, and she herself felt the urgent need to check her precious garden before the storm hit. The massive cloud bank was still distant, perhaps 2 hours away. "William, I need you to take charge while I check the garden," she told her oldest brother. "Start bringing in the animals and securing the shutters. Henry, help him with the chickens." "But Per said to stay together," William protested, though she could see he was pleased by the responsibility. "I'll just be in the garden," Eliza assured him. "I can see the house the entire time, and you can call if Pa returns." The vegetable garden, her pride and source of both food and many medicinal herbs, needed protection from potential hail. Eliza worked quickly, covering the most vulnerable plants with burlap. As she secured the last corner, she glanced toward the creek, barely visible as a line of cottonwoods a quarter-mile from the house. The yarrow would be flowering now, and she was nearly out of the dried blossoms essential for fever remedies. With the cattle drive approaching and rough men passing near the settlement, someone would likely need her medicines soon. The creek was farther than the garden, certainly, but still within sight of the cabin. Surely she could gather what was needed and return before the storm drew much closer. Decision made, Eliza called to William that she was checking the creek plants and would return shortly. She grabbed her gathering basket and moved swiftly through the tall grass. At the creek, Eliza worked efficiently, locating the yarrow patches and harvesting only what was needed, leaving plenty to reseed. She had just straightened up, basket nearly full, when she felt it, a vibration in the ground beneath her feet, so subtle at first she thought she might be imagining it. Then came the sound, a low rumble like distant thunder, but continuous, and growing steadily louder. Eliza froze, suddenly remembering her father's repeated warnings about the one danger on the plains that could arrive with almost no warning, a stampede. Dropping her basket, she turned toward home, ready to run, when she saw it, the dust cloud rising beyond the far bank of the creek, moving fast in her direction. The broken spur herd, somehow spooked into flight, was heading straight for Redstone Creek settlement, with Eliza directly in their path. Terror seized her as she realized the deadly mathematics of the situation. The cabin was too far to reach before the cattle arrived. The creek bed offered little protection. It was shallow in this drought season, and cattle could easily cross it. Her only hope was the stand of cottonwoods. If she could climb high enough, she might escape the trampling hooves below. Eliza ran for the largest tree, its lowest branches frustratingly high above her head. The ground was trembling continuously now, the rumble becoming a thunder that drowned out every other sound. With desperate strength born of pure survival instinct, she jumped for the lowest branch, caught it, and pulled herself up just as the first massive longhorns crashed through the creek bed. From her perch 12 feet above the ground, Eliza witnessed nature's terrifying power. The cattle moved like a flood of horn and muscle, eyes wild with panic, foaming at the mouth as they ran blindly forward. The earth itself seemed to disappear. Beneath the mass of animals, dust rising so thick it became difficult to breathe. For nearly 20 minutes, the stampede continued, an endless river of cattle following the path of least resistance along the creek. Eliza clung to her branch, eyes stinging from dust, praying that William and Henry had heeded their father's instructions and stayed inside the cabin, which lay blessedly outside the main path of the stampeding herd. When the last stragglers finally passed, Eliza remained in the tree, shaking with reaction and coated in fine dust. The landscape had been transformed, grass trampled flat, the creek banks torn apart, and her precious yarrow patch completely destroyed. But she was alive, and her home, visible in the distance, appeared intact. As she carefully descended, her foot slipped on the dust-covered branch. She fell awkwardly, landing with a sickening crack that sent pain shooting through her ankle. Crying out, Eliza tried to stand, only to collapse back to the ground. Her ankle was either badly sprained or broken. Either way, she couldn't walk. The first fat raindrops began to fall as Eliza dragged herself toward a hollow beneath the tree's roots. The storm that had likely spooked the cattle was arriving, and she was injured, alone, and a quarter-mile from shelter. Pulling herself under the meager protection of the hollow, she tried to think clearly through her panic. Her family would come looking once they realized she hadn't returned. But with the storm arriving and the chaos of the stampede, that might not happen until it was too late. The temperature was already dropping as the storm front moved in, and being soaked by rain would make the coming night potentially deadly, even in summer. As lightning split the sky and thunder crashed overhead, Eliza fought against rising despair. She tore strips from her petticoat to bind her ankle, then used a broken branch as a makeshift crutch. Perhaps she could hobble home, even if it took hours, but after just a few agonizing steps, she knew it was impossible. The ground was turning to mud, the crutch sank with each step, and the pain was unbearable. The rain began in earnest, a wall of water that reduced visibility to mere feet. Eliza retreated to her hollow, making herself as small as possible to conserve warmth as the water ran in rivulets around her. For the first time since her mother's death, she gave in to tears, the sound lost in the roar of the storm. Miles away, a different scene was unfolding at the Broken Spur camp. Men were shouting, horses whinnying in panic as the trail boss, Dalton, bellowed orders. "Get after them, damn it!" 2,000 heads scattered across the territory. "Move!" Apart from the chaos stood a tall figure, studying the ground with unusual intensity. Swift River, known to the white ranchers simply as Swift, was Half-Kiowa through his mother, with the dark hair and bronze complexion of his maternal heritage. His father had been a Texas rancher who, unlike many men of his time, had actually married the Kiowa woman who captured his heart, teaching his son both worlds' ways. At 30, Swift had earned respect even from men like Dalton, not through words, but through actions. His tracking abilities bordered on supernatural to those who didn't understand how deeply he read the land, and his quiet competence with horses and cattle made him invaluable to the outfit, despite the prejudice that sometimes surfaced. "Swift!" Dalton shouted over the intensifying rain. "Take the eastern section. Follow the creek bed. Most of them likely went that way. There's a settlement in that direction. Redstone something. Warn them if you can get there in time. Swift nodded once, already moving toward his horse, a magnificent buckskin gelding that, like its owner, combined strength with unusual intelligence. As he mounted and rode east, Swift knew Dalton's warning came too late. The Stampede had a significant head start, and the settlers would already have faced whatever damage was coming their way. Still, he rode hard through the beginning of the storm, reading the land even as rain washed away the most obvious signs. Where others saw mud and flattened grass, Swift noticed patterns: the direction of broken stems, the depth of hoofprints, the particular way rocks had been displaced. The herd had indeed followed the creek, exactly as he would have predicted. He approached the area where the creek passed closest to the settlement. Swift slowed his mount. The main body of cattle had continued north, but something drew his attention to a stand of cottonwoods. Dismounting, he examined the area with careful eyes despite the pouring rain. Most men would have seen nothing unusual, just more trampled ground among a landscape of destruction. But Swift noticed a different pattern of disturbance near one large tree. Smaller footprints, human rather than bovine, and a broken branch, with a clean, recent break, unlike the random damage caused by cattle. Someone had been here when the stampede came through. Moving in an expanding spiral from the tree, Swift found more evidence. A dropped basket, half buried in mud, trampled. Yarrow plants that had been partially harvested, and most concerning, a trail of disturbed mud leading away from the tree before disappearing in the increasingly heavy rain. An injured person had tried to leave but hadn't gotten far. Swift whistled for his horse, then continued his methodical search despite the storm's fury. The rain had nearly obliterated any trail, but Swift had tracked wounded deer through worse conditions. Moving carefully, he looked not for footprints, but for subtler signs. Bent grass blades, displaced stones, anything that indicated passage. Nearly 50 yards from the tree, beside an exposed root system partially hollowed by erosion, Swift found what he sought. Huddled in the inadequate shelter, soaked to the skin and shivering violently, was a young woman. Her face was pale beneath streaks of mud, her ankle crudely bandaged, and her eyes closed in what might have been unconsciousness or exhausted sleep. "Miss," Swift spoke quietly, not wanting to startle her, but the girl didn't respond. Kneeling beside her, he noted her bluish lips and the concerning pallor of her skin. Early signs of hypothermia despite the summer season. The combination of shock, injury, and being soaked by the cold rain was dangerous even for someone in full health. Without hesitation, Swift removed his oilskin coat and wrapped it around her, then carefully lifted her into his arms. She was light, too light for her height, and alarmingly cold. The settlement was closer than the ranch camp, but Swift had no way of knowing which house was hers, or how settlers might react to a Half-Kiowa man arriving with an unconscious girl in his arms, especially following a stampede caused by his outfit. His own line camp lay 3 miles east, a small but solid shelter he maintained, separate from the main Broken Spur operation. It was modest, just a one-room cabin with a lean-to for his horses, but it was dry, stocked with supplies, and he could get there faster than trying to search for the girl's family among angry settlers. Decision made, Swift carried her to his horse, then mounted carefully while cradling her against his chest. The buckskin, sensing the urgency, needed no urging to move swiftly through the storm. As they rode, Swift felt the girl stir slightly, a good sign that she wasn't too far gone. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "You're safe," he said, though he doubted she could hear him over the storm. "I'm taking you to a shelter." Her only response was to turn slightly toward his warmth, instinctively seeking the heat his body provided. Swift urged his horse faster, aware that her life now depended on his ability to get her warm and dry quickly. The eastern horizon gave no hint of the storm breaking soon, and night would bring even colder temperatures. As his cabin came into view, Swift allowed himself a moment of relief. The girl in his arms was still breathing, and soon he could provide the care she desperately needed. Yet he was acutely aware that in saving her from one danger, he had potentially created another kind of problem altogether. A Half-Kiowa man alone with a young white woman would raise questions, suspicions, and possibly violence when discovered, regardless of his intentions. But there was no other choice. The storm was reaching its full fury, the settlement was too far, and the girl's condition too precarious. Swift would deal with the consequences when they came. For now, all that mattered was keeping her alive through the night. Swift River's cabin stood as a testament to a man who existed between two worlds, neither fully embracing nor rejecting either heritage. The main room combined practical frontier, craftsmanship with subtle elements of Kiowa design. Animal hides, tanned, using methods passed down through his mother's family, hung beside shelves built with techniques his father had taught him. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, meticulously constructed to draw smoke efficiently while radiating maximum heat. As Swift carried Eliza through the doorway, rain cascading from his broad shoulders, his mind was already cataloguing what needed to be done. The girl's wet clothes would have to be removed, her injured ankle examined, and her core temperature raised gradually to avoid the dangerous after-effects of severe chilling. He laid her gently on his bed, a simple frame supporting a surprisingly comfortable mattress filled with sweet grass and prairie hay. Eliza stirred slightly, but didn't fully awaken, her breathing shallow and her skin still alarmingly cold. Swift moved with practiced efficiency, building a fire with kindling and logs kept dry in a covered bin, then hanging a kettle of water to heat. The necessary task of removing her wet clothing presented both practical and moral challenges. Swift had been raised with Kiowa respect for women's dignity alongside his father's frontier practicality. Hypothermia would kill the girl more certainly than any perceived impropriety. Yet he was acutely aware of how his actions might be interpreted by settlers already predisposed to think the worst of half-breeds. With characteristic decisiveness, Swift found a compromise. He removed her mud-caked outer dress and sodden petticoats, leaving her cotton shift in place, though it too was damp. Covering her immediately with thick buffalo robes, he turned his attention to her injured ankle, now swollen to nearly twice its normal size. The discoloration and angle suggested a fracture rather than a simple sprain. Swift had set bones before, endured both human and animal, but doing so properly required the patient's cooperation. For now, he merely stabilized the ankle with a temporary splint, knowing a more permanent solution would have to wait until she was conscious and warmer. The cabin gradually heated from the fire's growing strength. Swift prepared a simple broth from rabbit stock he'd made the previous day. The rich aroma filled the small space, mingling with the scent of drying wood, medicinal herbs hanging from the rafters, and the particular leather and smoke smell that permeated all frontier dwellings. Outside, the storm intensified, wind howling around the cabin's sturdy logs and rain hammering against the single window. Occasional lightning illuminated the interior in stark white flashes, followed by thunder that seemed to shake the very earth. Swift found himself oddly grateful for the storm's fury. It would prevent anyone from searching for the missing girl until morning at the earliest, giving her time to stabilize before the inevitable confrontation with her family. Nearly an hour passed before Eliza finally stirred, consciousness returning in confused fragments. The transition from cold, wet misery to unexpected warmth and comfort disoriented her completely. She blinked rapidly, trying to make sense of unfamiliar surroundings that appeared and disappeared with each lightning flash. A figure moved nearby, tall, broad-shouldered, and distinctly male. Terror shot through her until a calm, deep voice spoke. "You're safe. Don't try to move yet. L." The voice carried no threat, only quiet assurance. Eliza turned her head slightly, wincing at the stiffness in her neck to better see the cabin's owner. The next lightning flash revealed a man unlike any she'd encountered in Redstone Creek. His features combined angular planes and strong lines that spoke of both European and native heritage. His long black hair tied back practically, and his movements possessed an economy and grace that suggested complete comfort with his own strength. "Who?" Her voice emerged as a croak, her throat parched from the ordeal. Swift approached slowly, deliberately keeping his movements non-threatening, and offered a cup of water. "My name is Swift River. Most whites call me Swift. I work for the Broken Spur outfit." The reference to the cattle drive snapped Eliza fully awake. "The Stampede, my brothers, my father." "Easy," Swift cautioned as she tried to sit up. "Your family's homestead appeared untouched. The herd followed the creek bed, away from the settlement." Relief flooded through her, immediately followed by awareness of her situation. Alone in a stranger's cabin, injured, and dressed only in her shift beneath unfamiliar furs. Her expression must have revealed her thoughts, for Swift stepped back, creating respectful distance. "I found you near the creek, half drowned and freezing. Your ankle is likely broken. The storm made reaching the settlement impossible." His explanation was straightforward, neither apologizing for the necessary rescue nor expressing discomfort with the unconventional circumstances. Eliza gathered the furs more tightly around herself, wincing as the movement jarred her injured ankle. Logic battled with ingrained propriety. This man had undoubtedly saved her life, yet everything about the situation violated the social boundaries she'd been raised to observe. "Thank you," she managed finally, choosing gratitude over fear. "I'm Eliza Blackwood. Our homestead is near where you found me." Swift nodded. "I know the Blackwood place. Good land, well chosen." He moved to the fire, stirring something in a small pot. "You need warmth inside as well. Can you manage broth?" The mention of food reminded Eliza that she hadn't eaten since early morning. Her stomach answered with an embarrassing growl before she could respond. Despite everything, a smile flickered briefly across Swift's serious features as he poured steaming broth into a wooden bowl. "Your body speaks clearly when needed." He helped her sit up, supporting her back with a rolled blanket, then handed her the bowl. The rich aroma made her mouth water, and the first sip spread blessed warmth through her chest. As she drank, Swift examined her ankle more carefully, his touch professional and impersonal. "Clean break, I think. I can set it properly once you've regained some strength." Eliza noted the assortment of herbs hanging from the rafters, many familiar to her from her own healing work. "You know medicine?" Swift followed her gaze to the drying plants. "Some. My mother was known for healing skills among her people. She taught me which plants heal, which harm, which bring visions." "Your mother was Kiowa?" Eliza asked, realizing immediately how direct the question was. In the settlement, no one would ask such a thing so bluntly, though they would certainly whisper about it behind closed doors. If Swift took offense, he didn't show it. "Yes, my father was a Texas rancher who respected her people's ways. They taught me both paths, though neither world fully accepts someone who walks between." The simple statement revealed more about his life than a longer explanation might have. Eliza understood something of existing between categories. As a young woman with book learning and healing skills, she occupied an uncomfortable space in frontier society, respected for useful knowledge, but viewed with suspicion for stepping beyond traditional female roles. "I understand. Somewhat, at least," she offered. People want simple categories: healer or housewife, rancher or Indian, not both. Swift looked at her with new interest, as if reassessing his impression. Most settlers see only what they expect to see. My father taught school back east before bringing us west, Eliza explained. He believes education matters more than conventions. The revelation of her family background seemed to ease some invisible tension. Swift added wood to the fire, then moved to prepare a more substantial meal, now that she had tolerated the broth. Outside, the storm continued unabated, rain hammering against the roof in rhythmic drumming. "The storm will last through the night," Swift observed. "No one will search until morning. We should set your ankle properly now that you're warmer." Eliza nodded, both dreading the painful procedure and recognizing its necessity. "I've assisted with setting bones before, though never experienced it myself." Swift gathered supplies methodically: straight sticks for splinting, strips of leather for binding, and a small pouch from which he extracted dried plants Eliza recognized as powerful pain relievers. "Willow bark and valerian," she identified. "Surprised at the careful preparation. And skullcap," Swift added. "My mother's addition to the traditional mixture. It relaxes the muscles, makes setting easier." He brewed a strong tea with the herbs, adding honey to make the bitter concoction more palatable. As Eliza drank, Swift explained the procedure matter-of-factly, respecting her intelligence rather than attempting to shield her from the reality of what needed to be done. "The break is clean, but needs straight alignment. It will hurt intensely for a moment, then ease. I'll need to hold the splints firmly for proper healing." Eliza finished the medicinal tea, already feeling its effects, as a slight drowsiness and distance from her discomfort. "I'm ready." Swift positioned himself at the foot of the bed, his strong hands gentle as they took hold of her injured foot and ankle. "Look at the ceiling beams," he instructed. "Count the knots in the wood. Don't anticipate the movement." Eliza did as instructed, focusing on the rough-hewn logs overhead. She had reached the fourth knot when Swift moved with sudden, precise force. White-hot pain shot through her leg, drawing an involuntary cry that she quickly bit back. Almost immediately, the agony subsided to a throbbing ache as Swift efficiently secured the splints with leather bindings. "Done," he said simply. "You handled it well." Eliza released the breath she'd been holding, surprised to find tears streaming down her face despite her efforts at stoicism. Swift pretended not to notice, allowing her dignity as he moved away to prepare food, giving her space to compose herself. The combination of physical trauma, herbs, and emotional exhaustion soon pulled Eliza towards sleep. She fought it briefly, still uncomfortable with the impropriety of her situation, despite the necessity, but Swift's quiet voice broke through her fading consciousness. "Rest. Healing comes with sleep. I'll keep watch." She surrendered to exhaustion then, dimly aware of being covered more securely with the furs before darkness claimed her completely. When Eliza next woke, pale morning light filtered through the cabin's single window. The storm had passed, leaving behind that particular freshness that follows prairie rains. For a moment she lay still, orienting herself to her surroundings and the events that had brought her here. Swift was nowhere to be seen, though embers still glowed in the fireplace, indicating he hadn't been gone long. Her ankle throbbed dully, but no longer with the sharp, sickening pain of the previous day. Experimentally, she pushed herself to a sitting position, moving carefully to avoid jarring the injury. The cabin appeared smaller in daylight, but meticulously organized. Every item had its place: tools hung on pegs, cooking implements arranged by size and function, furs and blankets neatly folded when not in use. Nothing extravagant, nothing wasted, yet the space conveyed a sense of home rather than mere shelter. On a small table beside the bed, Eliza discovered a pitcher of water, a cup, and something unexpected: her dress, cleaned of mud and dried overnight, folded neatly beside her mended petticoat. The thoughtfulness of this gesture moved her unexpectedly. She had just managed to pull the dress over her shift when the door opened and Swift entered, carrying an armful of kindling. He paused, clearly not having expected to find her awake and moving. "You should rest longer," he said by way of greeting, setting down the wood. "I've imposed enough," Eliza replied, though in truth she had no idea how she would return home with her ankle splinted. "My family will be frantic," Swift nodded, accepting the logic of her concern. "I'll take you home once you've eaten. It's a short ride if we go directly." He moved to the fireplace, building up the fire with practiced efficiency before preparing a simple breakfast of cornbread and dried apples reconstituted in honey water. The food was plain but nourishing, and Eliza realized how hungry she was. Only after taking the first bite, as they ate, Swift outlined his plan. "The broken spur outfit will be busy gathering scattered cattle for days. I've been tasked with the eastern section, which gives me freedom to move. I can get you home without questions from the other hands." Eliza understood the subtext. He was protecting both her reputation and his own standing by avoiding witnesses to their unconventional night of proximity. "Thank you for everything." Swift acknowledged her gratitude with a slight nod, then asked a practical question. "Your family, how will they respond to me bringing you home?" It was a fair concern. Thomas Blackwood was more progressive than most settlers, but finding his daughter in the company of a Half-Kiowa man would test even his open-mindedness, and the neighbors, already on edge after the Stampede, might react with hostility rather than gratitude. "My father is a reasonable man," Eliza said carefully, "but the settlement has prejudices. It would be better if I could explain first, before they jump to conclusions." Swift's expression remained neutral, but something flickered. In his dark eyes, resignation perhaps to a reality he had long ago accepted. "We can approach from the east. I'll help you to your door, but stay mounted. Your father can see you're safe without forcing a confrontation he may not welcome." The simple practicality of his solution, free from either self-pity or resentment, impressed Eliza. This man navigated the unfairness of frontier society with dignified pragmatism, neither accepting its limitations as just, nor wasting energy on futile protest. While Swift prepared his horse, Eliza found herself reflecting on the strange turn of events that had brought her here. Yesterday morning, she had been the capable, eldest daughter of the Blackwood family, confident in her place and purpose. Now she had experienced both terrifying vulnerability and unexpected connection with someone who existed beyond the borders of her familiar world. The realization that she would likely never see Swift River again after he returned home created an unexpected hollow feeling. He had saved her life, cared for her injuries, treated her with respect that acknowledged both her femininity and her intelligence. Experiences rare enough to be precious. When it came time to depart, Swift helped her mount his buckskin gelding with careful hands that never lingered longer than necessary. He climbed up behind her, maintaining a respectful distance while still providing the support she needed to ride safely with her injured ankle. As they left the clearing where his cabin stood, Eliza noticed details of the surrounding landscape. She had been too incapacitated to observe on arrival. The location was well chosen, sheltered by a stand of oak trees, near a small spring that provided fresh water with good graze for horses, but obscured enough from main trails to offer. "And privacy. You built this place yourself?" she asked as they followed a faint trail through prairie grass, now brilliantly green after the rain. 4 years ago, Swift confirmed. The broken spur lets hands establish line camps if they improve the territory. Most choose to bunk together at the main ranch, but I prefer my own space. Eliza understood the unstated reason for this preference. Life would be simpler without constant navigation of prejudices and assumptions. It's a good cabin, well made. Swift guided the horse around a particularly muddy section of trail. "It suits my needs. Not what most women would consider adequate, I expect." "Most women haven't seen what I saw yesterday," Eliza replied. "A sturdy roof and dry walls gain new appreciation after huddling under tree roots in a storm." This drew a brief chuckle from Swift, the first true laugh she'd heard from him. The sound transformed his serious features momentarily, revealing a different man than the stoic figure who had rescued and tended her. "Truth in that," he acknowledged. They rode in comfortable silence for a time, the buckskin picking its way, confidently, through terrain still sodden from the storm. Eventually, familiar landmarks appeared, the lightning-scarred cottonwood that marked the border of Blackwood property, then the distinctive rise of land that sheltered the homestead from northern winds. As they created a small hill, the Blackwood cabin came into view. Even from a distance, signs of distress were evident. The door stood open, and figures moved rapidly around the yard. A search party was clearly preparing to depart. Swift reined in his horse, assessing the situation with quick eyes. "Your family is safe, but searching for you." He pointed to the distinct figure of Thomas Blackwood, directing several mounted neighbors. Relief and anxiety mingled in Eliza's chest. "Thank God they're all right." "We'll approach slowly," Swift decided. "No sudden movements that might be misinterpreted by anxious men with rifles." They descended the hill at a walk, Swift deliberately keeping to open ground where they would be visible for maximum distance. When they were approximately 200 yards from the cabin, Thomas Blackwood spotted them, freezing momentarily before shouting something to the other men and running toward his daughter. "This is where I leave you," Swift said quietly, helping Eliza slide carefully from the saddle into her father's approaching arms. "Eliza, my God, we thought—" Thomas broke off, clutching his daughter while simultaneously registering the presence of the mounted stranger. His expression cycled rapidly through relief, confusion, and wariness. Before he could speak again, Eliza quickly explained, "Father, this is Swift River of the Broken Spur. He found me after the Stampede when I was injured and caught in the storm. He saved my life." Thomas looked up at the impassive rider, clearly struggling to reconcile preconceptions with the man before him and the simple fact of his daughter's safe return. The neighbors were approaching now, some with hands hovering near weapons. "You have my gratitude, sir," Thomas finally said, his educator's vocabulary asserting itself even in this tense moment. "We've been frantic with worry." Swift nodded once in acknowledgement. "She's brave and resourceful. The ankle is broken, but clean set. It should heal well with rest." Without further elaboration, he began to turn his horse. "Wait," Eliza called. "Will you—" She hesitated, suddenly aware of the watching neighbors and the impossibility of saying what she truly felt. That this brief encounter had shifted something fundamental in her understanding of the world. And the people in it. Swift seemed to read the complexity behind her unfinished question. His expression softened slightly, and he offered a reply to words unspoken. "The Broken Spur will be working this territory for another week. I ride the eastern section daily." It was neither promise nor dismissal, simply information offered without expectation. With a final nod to Thomas, Swift turned his horse and rode away, his straight-backed silhouette soon disappearing into the rolling prairie landscape. Thomas gathered Eliza close again, relief temporarily overwhelming questions about her ordeal or the unusual circumstances of her return. "Let's get you inside, child. Your brothers have been beside themselves, and you clearly need rest." As her father helped her limp toward home, Eliza glanced back at the empty horizon where Swift had vanished. The Stampede had nearly taken her life, but had instead delivered an unexpected lesson about courage, kindness, and the artificial nature of the boundaries people constructed between themselves. Whether she would see Swift River again remained uncertain, But Eliza knew with absolute clarity that nothing, not her understanding of herself, her community, or her future, would ever be quite the same again. The Blackwood homestead hummed with subdued activity in the days following Eliza's return. News of her ordeal spread quickly through Redstone Creek settlement, transforming with each retelling until the story barely resembled the truth. Some versions painted her as a helpless victim rescued by a mysterious Indian scout, while others hinted at darker interpretations of her night away from home. Confined to a chair with her splintered ankle elevated, Eliza found herself simultaneously the center of attention and strangely isolated. Neighboring women visited with covered dishes and barely concealed curiosity, their questions probing beneath a veneer of concern. "Such a terrible experience for you, dear," Mrs. Jenkins commented, during one such visit, arranging a fresh apple cake on the Blackwood's modest table. "And to think, alone with a half-breed for an entire night. Providence surely protected your virtue." Eliza maintained a composed expression, despite the fury that rose within her at the casual prejudice. "Providence worked through Mr. Rivers' hands, Mrs. Jenkins. Without his knowledge of tracking and healing, I would have died in that storm." Mrs. Jenkins exchanged meaningful glances with Mrs. Cooper, who had accompanied her. "Of course, dear. Still, your father must have been beside himself with worry about, well, propriety." Thomas Blackwood, entering the cabin with an armload of firewood, overheard the exchange. Since Eliza's return, he had shown remarkable restraint regarding her rescue, asking only practical questions about her care and listening attentively to her account without judgment. "My primary concern, ladies," he interjected with the firm but measured tone that had served him well as a schoolteacher, "was my daughter's survival. Mr. River returned her safely, with her injury properly treated. His actions deserve gratitude, not speculation." The women fell silent, though their expressions suggested the matter was far from settled in their minds. After they departed, Thomas sat beside Eliza with a weary sigh. "Their tongues may never cease wagging, but you needn't bear the burden of their narrow thinking," he told her, patting her hand gently. "I've encountered enough of the world to know character isn't determined by bloodlines." Eliza studied her father's face, lined with the hardships of frontier life, but still bearing the thoughtful intelligence that had guided their family. "You're not troubled by what happened?" Thomas considered his response carefully. "I'm troubled that you nearly died, that you suffered alone before help arrived. I'm troubled that the cattle drive passed so close to our homestead despite our objections." He met her gaze directly. "But am I troubled that the man who saved you has Kiowa blood? No. That would be poor Christianity indeed." Relief washed through Eliza. Though she had believed in her father's fairness, confirmation of his open-mindedness brought unexpected emotion. Most men wouldn't see it so clearly. Most men haven't buried a wife and faced raising children alone in unfamiliar territory, Thomas replied with quiet gravity. Such experiences have a way of clarifying what truly matters. They sat in companionable silence for a moment before Thomas asked a question that surprised her. "This Swift River, tell me about him. Not just the rescue, but the man himself." Eliza found herself struggling to articulate the complex impression Swift had made. "He's different from anyone I've met, completely self-sufficient, yet not isolated in spirit. He knows both worlds, white and Kiowa, but seems to hold himself apart from each." She traced the pattern on her calico dress absently. "He treated me with respect, not just as a woman to be protected, but as a person with skills and intelligence." Thomas listened thoughtfully, his expression revealing nothing of his inner response to this unusually detailed assessment. "His healing knowledge, you mentioned it was extensive?" "Yes," Eliza brightened, moving to safer territory. He uses many of the same herbs grandmother taught me, but with different preparations. His mother was a Kiowa healer who passed down traditional knowledge. Interesting, Thomas mused. Perhaps there's wisdom there that could benefit more than just you. Before Eliza could explore this unexpected opening, her brothers burst into the cabin, their youthful energy dispersing the contemplative mood. William carried a carefully constructed crutch he had made under their father's guidance, eager to help his sister regain mobility. Henry clutched a handful of wildflowers, slightly crushed from his enthusiastic grip, but offered with such genuine affection that their bedraggled state only endeared them more. Thomas rose, returning to the practical matters of running their homestead, but the conversation lingered in Eliza's mind. Her father's reaction had surprised her, not merely acceptance of Swift's role in her rescue, but genuine interest in him as a person with valuable knowledge. The crutch proved more difficult to master than anticipated. By the third day of awkward hopping around the cabin, Eliza longed desperately for fresh air and a change of scenery. The persistent throbbing in her ankle seemed a small price to pay for escape from the increasingly claustrophobic interior. "I'm going to sit on the porch," she announced to William, who had appointed himself her primary attendant. "The sunshine will do me good." Her brother looked dubious, but helped arrange a comfortable seat with cushions to elevate her injured limb. "Pa said not to overdo it," he cautioned with endearing seriousness. "Just sitting, I promise," Eliza assured him, though in truth, her thoughts had increasingly turned toward the eastern border of their property, where Swift had mentioned he would be riding daily. From the porch, Eliza could see the damage left by the Stampede, a wide swath of trampled earth following the creek bed, torn vegetation slowly beginning to recover in the warm spring sunshine. The Blackwood crops had thankfully been spared, though the Jenkins property to the south had lost nearly an acre of young corn to the panicked cattle. As she sat absorbing the familiar landscape with new appreciation, a movement on the distant horizon caught her attention. A lone rider approached on a trail that skirted their property, moving with the unhurried confidence she immediately recognized. Swift River, making his daily rounds of the Eastern Territory. Eliza's heart quickened unexpectedly. She had thought of him often in the days since her return, replaying their conversations and analyzing the subtle shifts in his expression that revealed more than his measured words. Now, seeing him in the distance, she realized how much she had hoped for this opportunity. Without conscious decision, she raised her hand in greeting, uncertain if he was close enough to notice. For several long moments, the rider continued without acknowledgement, and disappointment began to settle over her. Then, abruptly, he changed direction, turning his buckskin toward the Blackwood homestead. William appeared at the door, alerted by some sixth sense to the approaching visitor. "Eliza, there's a he broke off, recognizing the rider. "It's him, isn't it, the Indian who found you?" "Half-Kiowa," Eliza corrected automatically. "Yes, that's Mr. River. Please tell father." As Swift drew closer, Eliza became uncomfortably aware of her disheveled appearance, hair hastily braided that morning, a simple homespun dress chosen for practicality with her injury, and the splinted ankle itself propped ungracefully before her. She resisted the unfamiliar urge to smooth her hair or adjust her collar, confused by her sudden concern for appearances. Swift halted his horse at a respectful distance from the cabin, removing his hat as Thomas emerged onto the porch. The gesture, a nod to white customs, spoke volumes about his navigation between cultures. "Mr. Blackwood," he acknowledged with a slight nod. "I was passing nearby and wanted to check on your daughter's recovery." Thomas stepped forward, extending his hand in greeting, a simple act that carried significant meaning in the territorial borderlands. "Mr. River, we're in your debt. Please join us if your duties permit." Something flickered across Swift's expression, surprise perhaps at the genuine welcome. before he dismounted with fluid grace. Securing his horse to the hitching post, he approached the porch with measured steps, neither hesitant nor presumptuous. "How does the ankle heal?" he asked Eliza directly, his dark eyes assessing the splintered limb professionally. "Better each." "A day," she replied, strangely breathless. "Your setting was skillful. Our neighbor, Mrs. Cooper, who has nursing experience, said she couldn't have done better herself." The compliment seemed to embarrass him slightly. He nodded acknowledgement, but turned the conversation away from himself. "The swelling has decreased. Good. Keep it elevated another week before attempting weight." Thomas invited Swift to sit, offering water from their well, which Swift accepted with thanks. An awkward silence threatened until William and Henry emerged from the cabin, curiosity overwhelming their shyness. "Did you really track my sister through the storm?" William asked bluntly, earning a reproving look from his father for the directness of the question. Swift considered the boy seriously. "Yes. The rain washed away most signs, but water moves differently when someone has passed. Bent grass reflects light differently. Small things make patterns if you know how to read them." William's eyes widened with genuine admiration. "Could you teach me?" "William, Mr. River isn't here to—" Thomas began, but Swift interrupted gently. "It's a useful skill for anyone who lives on the plains," he said. "I could show you some basics before I leave." The simple offer transformed the atmosphere, breaking through the remaining tension. As Swift demonstrated fundamental tracking concepts to the enraptured boys in the yard, Thomas settled beside Eliza on the porch. "An interesting man," he observed quietly, educated in his own way, though not conventionally. Eliza nodded, watching as Swift knelt to show the boys how to identify different animal tracks in the soft earth. "His knowledge is practical, but deep. He understands why things work, not just how." "The settlement could benefit from such knowledge," Thomas mused, "especially with more cattle drives expected this season. Knowing how to avoid another Stampede disaster would be valuable." The seed of an idea took root in Eliza's mind, but before she could explore it, Swift concluded his impromptu lesson and returned to the porch. The boys followed, peppering him with questions he answered with surprising patience. "Thank you," Thomas said when the children finally paused for breath. "They've been full of questions about tracking since Eliza's rescue. Having real answers means a great deal." Swift accepted the gratitude with characteristic reserve. Children learn quickly when interested. These boys have good eyes for detail. An idea that had been forming in Eliza's mind suddenly crystallized into words. "Mr. River, the settlement is holding a meeting next week about future cattle drives. After what happened, people are concerned about safety, but few understand the realities of handling large herds." Swift's expression grew guarded. "Settlement meetings aren't typically welcoming to men like me." "They would be if you came as our guest," Thomas interjected, quickly grasping his daughter's intention. "Your perspective could prevent future tragedies. The Broken Spur outfit bears responsibility for the Stampede, but working together might prevent recurrences." Uncertainty showed briefly in Swift's usually impassive features. Ranchers and settlers rarely find common ground. "All the more reason to try," Eliza pressed. "Lives depend on it, on both sides." Swift studied her with an intensity that made her cheeks warm. "Your neighbors may not share your openness, Miss Blackwood." "Some won't," Thomas acknowledged frankly, "but reasonable voices tend to prevail when practical solutions are offered. Your knowledge might bridge the divide." The proposition hung in the air between them, weighted with implications beyond the simple matter of a settlement meeting. Swift was being invited not just to speak, but to cross a social boundary few had attempted to traverse. After long consideration, he inclined, his head slightly. "When is this meeting?" "Wednesday next at the Cooper barn," Thomas replied, "though I'd ask you to join us for supper beforehand if you're willing." Again, that flicker of surprise crossed Swift's face before he composed his features. "I'll come, though I make no promises about changing entrenched opinions." "Fair enough," Thomas agreed, rising to his feet. "We'll expect you at sundown Wednesday." The boys extracted promises of more tracking lessons before Swift finally took his leave, mounting his buckskin with the easy movement of someone who had spent most of his life on horseback. As he rode away, Eliza felt a curious mixture of anticipation and anxiety about the coming meeting. "Are you certain this is wise, Father?" she asked quietly, once Swift was beyond earshot. "The settlement has strong feelings about mixing with native people." Thomas watched the retreating figure thoughtfully. "Progress rarely comes without resistance, Eliza. Sometimes minds can only be changed through direct experience." He turned to her with unexpected insight in his eyes. "Besides, I suspect your interest goes beyond practical concerns about cattle drives." Heat rushed to Eliza's face. "I admire his knowledge and skill. The settlement would benefit from both." "Indeed," Thomas replied, a hint of amusement softening his features. "Just as I admired your mother's intelligence and poise when I first met her, with absolutely no personal interest involved." The gentle teasing left Eliza speechless, uncertain whether to be mortified that her father had perceived feelings she herself had barely acknowledged, or relieved that he seemed unbothered by the possibility. Before she could formulate a response, Thomas placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Swift River strikes me as a man of integrity, Eliza. His heritage matters less than his character. Remember that, whatever the neighbors may say in the coming days." With that, he returned to the cabin, leaving Eliza to contemplate the complexity of her feelings and the potential consequences of Wednesday's meeting. The days passed with agonizing slowness as Eliza's ankle gradually improved. By Tuesday, she could put minimal weight on it, enough to move around the cabin without the crutch if she was careful. This small independence lifted her spirits considerably, though the approaching meeting filled her with conflicting emotions. Word had spread throughout the settlement that the half-breed tracker who had rescued Thomas Blackwood's daughter would attend the cattle drive meeting. Reactions ranged from curiosity to outright hostility, with more than one neighbor suggesting that inviting a man with Indian blood to a settler gathering was inappropriate at best and dangerous at worst. "You're stirring up trouble," Mrs. Cooper warned during a brief visit to check Eliza's splint. "People are saying your time alone with that man has affected your judgment." Eliza stiffened. "Mr. River saved my life at risk to his own reputation. The least we can do is listen to knowledge that might prevent future tragedies." The older woman's expression softened slightly. "You've always had a kind heart, Eliza, but the world isn't ready for the kind of acceptance you're suggesting." "Then perhaps it's time the world caught up," Eliza replied, with more sharpness than she intended. "My grandmother couldn't vote or own property in her own name. My mother wasn't permitted to attend university despite her brilliant mind. I accept those limitations too, simply because the world isn't ready, Mrs." Cooper seemed taken aback by the passion in Eliza's voice. "This is different, child." "Is it?" Eliza asked quietly. "Or is it simply another boundary maintained through fear rather than reason?" The conversation left Eliza unsettled, aware that Wednesday's meeting represented not just a practical discussion about cattle drives, but a challenge to deeply entrenched social hierarchies. Swift would face skepticism at best, open hostility at worst, and she had been instrumental in placing him in that position. When Wednesday finally arrived, Eliza took particular care with her appearance, choosing her mother's blue calico dress that brought out her eyes and arranging her hair in a style more sophisticated than her usual practical braid. Thomas raised an eyebrow, but made no comment beyond a knowing smile as they prepared for their visitor's arrival. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Eliza found herself repeatedly glancing toward the eastern trail. What if? Swift had reconsidered. What if the prospect of facing a hostile settlement had outweighed whatever obligation he felt toward the Blackwoods? Her fears proved unfounded. Just as the golden light of evening bathed the homestead, a rider appeared on the horizon, Swift River coming as promised to face whatever reception awaited him among the settlers of Redstone Creek. Swift River's arrival at the Blackwood homestead silenced the usual evening sounds. Even the chickens seemed to pause their scratching as he dismounted with fluid grace. He had made concessions to the occasion, wearing a clean cotton shirt beneath his practical leather vest, his long hair neatly tied back. Most striking was the careful balance he struck between cultures. His clothing primarily reflected frontier practicality, neither flamboyantly native nor attempting to disguise his heritage. Thomas greeted him with genuine warmth, while William and Henry abandoned all pretense of finishing their chores to pepper him with questions about his horse, his knife, and whether he'd tracked any mountain lions recently. Eliza observed their interaction from the porch, noting how Swift answered the boys with patient seriousness rather than the dismissive tolerance many adults showed children. When he finally mounted the steps to the porch, his dark eyes met hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You're walking," he observed, noticing her reduced dependence on the crutch. "Thanks to your care," Eliza replied, suddenly self-conscious about the extra attention she'd given to her appearance. "Please come inside. Supper is nearly ready." The Blackwood cabin was modest but welcoming, its interior reflecting Thomas's commitment to creating a home rather than mere shelter. Books lined rough-hewn shelves, colorful quilts brightened the simple furniture, and dried flowers hung in bunches from the ceiling beams, Eliza's contribution to making the space beautiful as well as functional. Swift entered with the slight hesitation of someone unaccustomed to being welcomed into settler homes. His eyes took in the details quickly, lingering briefly on the small portrait of Rebecca Blackwood that held pride of place near the fireplace. "Your mother?" he asked Eliza quietly as Thomas busied himself at the stove. "Yes, she died 2 years ago." Eliza touched the frame gently. "Childbed fever after Henry was born." Swift nodded with understanding that required no elaboration. Death in childbirth was a grim reality for women of all cultures across the frontier. "She had kind eyes," he observed simply. The observation, so unexpected yet perfectly accurate, brought a lump to Eliza's throat. Rebecca Blackwood had indeed possessed extraordinary kindness, her gentle nature balancing Thomas's more intellectual temperament. "She would have thanked you herself for saving me," Eliza managed, "and probably sent you home with enough food for a week." A hint of a smile touched Swift's usually solemn features. "My mother was the same. Feeding people was her answer to most problems." This glimpse into his family life, freely offered rather than reluctantly extracted, felt like a gift. Before Eliza could respond, Thomas announced that supper was ready, saving her from the emotion threatening to overwhelm her composure. The meal was simple but abundant: venison stew, cornbread, and early spring greens that Eliza had managed to gather despite her injury. Swift ate with appreciation but restraint, his manners revealing his father's influence alongside Kiowa cultural practices. Conversation flowed more easily than might have been expected, with Thomas drawing Swift out about his experiences as a tracker for various outfits across the territory. The boys listened raptly to accounts of following wolf packs through winter snow and tracking lost cattle through raging thunderstorms. "You mentioned your mother was a healer," Thomas said as they finished the meal. "Eliza has similar interests. Her grandmother taught her about medicinal plants before we came west." Swift turned his attention to Eliza. "I noticed your knowledge of the herbs I used for your ankle. Few settlers recognize the skullcap or know its properties." "Grandmother believed in old remedies," Eliza explained, pleased by his recognition of her knowledge. She combined European traditions with plants she learned about from local tribes in Illinois. "Knowledge worth preserving," Swift commented. "Too many dismiss wisdom that doesn't come from medical schools." Thomas leaned forward, his educator's passion evident. "That's precisely what I've argued for years. Different traditions contain valuable insights. Rejecting knowledge because of its source is foolishness." As Thomas and Swift discussed the merits of various healing traditions, Eliza found herself studying Swift's face in the lamplight. The usual guardedness had softened, revealing an intelligence and thoughtfulness rarely displayed to outsiders. This was the man she had glimpsed during her recovery at his cabin, not the stoic figure he presented to the world, but someone with depth, curiosity, and unexpected gentleness. When it came time to leave for the meeting, Swift offered his arm to help Eliza navigate the uneven ground between their homestead and the Cooper barn. The simple courtesy felt profoundly significant. A Half-Kiowa man publicly escorting a white settler woman, her hand resting lightly on his forearm, her father walking beside them with implicit approval. "People will talk," Eliza murmured, aware of how the scene would appear to neighbors already suspicious of Swift's presence. "People always talk," Swift replied philosophically. "Does their talk change what's right?" The question, posed without judgment, resonated with Eliza's own evolving perspective. "No," she answered finally, "it shouldn't." As they approached the Cooper property, the low murmur of voices carried across the evening air. Nearly 40 settlers had gathered, most of the families from Redstone Creek and some from outlying homesteads who had traveled specifically for the meeting. Conversations abruptly faded as the trio came into view, replaced by a silence heavy with unspoken judgment. James Cooper stepped forward, his weather-beaten face revealing conflicted emotions. As host and respected elder, he felt obligated to welcome all attendees, yet Swift's presence clearly made him uncomfortable. "Thomas, Eliza," he greeted with forced joviality before acknowledging Swift with a curt nod. "Mr. River, is it? Didn't expect to see one of the broken spur men tonight." "Mr. River is here at my invitation," Thomas stated firmly. His knowledge of cattle behavior and tracking skills could help prevent another disaster like the one that nearly cost my daughter's life. Cooper's wife appeared at his side, her hospitality warring visibly with ingrained prejudice. "Well, everyone's welcome, I suppose. Meeting's about to start in the barn." The assembled settlers parted reluctantly as Thomas led the way inside, whispers following in their wake. Eliza kept her chin high, though her grip tightened slightly on Swift's arm. He remained outwardly impassive, but she felt the subtle tension in his muscles, the only indication of his awareness of the hostile scrutiny. The barn had been arranged with rough benches facing a small platform where Samuel Jenkins, the settlement's unofficial leader, stood ready to begin proceedings. He faltered momentarily. Upon seeing Swift, then recovered with the politician's practiced smile. "Folks, let's get started. We're here to discuss the increased cattle traffic expected this season and how to protect our properties and families." Jenkins surveyed the crowd. "The incident last week with the broken spur herd shows the dangers we face." Several settlers muttered agreement, casting pointed glances towards Swift, who had positioned himself at the outer edge of the gathering with Thomas and Eliza. "Those ranchers have no respect for settlers," declared Hiram Wilson, whose corn crop had been partially destroyed. "They drive their beasts wherever they please, caring nothing for our fields or safety." A chorus of agreement followed this statement. Jenkins nodded sympathetically. "We need to establish clear boundaries and consequences, perhaps a petition to the territorial authorities." "If I might speak," Thomas Blackwood interrupted, rising to his feet. "I believe we have an opportunity for more immediate solutions." Jenkins hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "Go ahead, Thomas." Thomas gestured toward Swift. "Mr. River works with the Broken Spur outfit but understands our concerns. As settlers, he has extensive knowledge of cattle drives and how to prevent stampedes. I've invited him to share insights that might help us all coexist more safely." A tense silence followed this introduction. Several men exchanged skeptical glances, while a few women whispered behind raised hands. Finally, Jenkins spoke with transparent reluctance. "I suppose it wouldn't hurt to hear what he has to say. Mr. River." Swift rose slowly, his composure unshaken by the barely concealed hostility. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly through the barn, measured and authoritative without being confrontational. "A stampede benefits no one. The Broken Spur lost 12 heads in last week's incident, along with injuries to 3 hands. Both sides have reasons to prevent such occurrences." He proceeded to explain in practical terms how cattle respond to various stimuli: thunderstorms, predators, sudden movements, and the early warning signs of herd unrest. His knowledge was specific and detailed, reflecting years of close observation, rather than merely received wisdom. "Certain landscape features can help divert a stampeding herd," he continued, sketching a rough map on the dirt floor with a stick. "Natural barriers like creek beds or ridgelines can channel movement away from settlements if properly utilized." Despite initial skepticism, many of the settlers found themselves drawn into Swift's explanation. His suggestions were concrete and immediately applicable, creating breakaway fencing that would collapse in specific directions if pressure tested, establishing warning systems using mirrors to flash signals between properties, and planting specific crops in strategic locations that cattle typically avoid. Most importantly, he concluded, communication between outfits and settlements must improve. Knowing when herds will pass allows preparation. The Broken Spur trail boss would likely agree to adjustments if presented as mutual benefit rather than demands. When Swift finished speaking, an unexpected silence fell over the gathering. His presentation had been neither emotional appeal nor confrontational challenge, but a straightforward sharing of practical knowledge that might save lives and property on both sides of the cultural divide. Samuel Jenkins cleared his throat. "Well, that's certainly informative. Thank you, Mr. River." "He makes sense," declared old Martha Peterson, whose decades on the frontier gave her opinions particular weight. "Nothing he's said contradicts what my late husband observed about cattle behavior. Smart ideas about those breakaway fences, too." This endorsement from a respected settler widow opened the floodgates of discussion. Some remained suspicious of Swift's motives, but others began asking specific questions about implementing his suggestions. The conversation gradually shifted from abstract complaints about ranches to practical solutions that settlers themselves could undertake. Throughout the exchange, Eliza observed Swift with growing admiration. He navigated the complex social dynamics with careful dignity, neither apologizing for his presence nor challenging prejudices directly. Instead, he simply demonstrated his expertise, allowing knowledge to bridge divides that rhetoric could not. As the meeting concluded, Thomas proposed forming a committee to implement Swift's suggestions and establish communication with the Broken Spur outfit before the next drive. To everyone's surprise, including Swift's, Jenkins nominated him to serve as liaison between settlers and ranchers. "Do you understand both sides?" Jenkins acknowledged grudgingly. "Makes sense to utilize that, assuming your outfit agrees." Swift considered the proposal carefully before responding. "I'll speak with the trail boss. If he agrees, I'm willing." The meeting dispersed with a tentative plan in place, not the unified hostility toward ranchers that many had expected, but a pragmatic approach to coexistence that acknowledged the realities of territorial life. As settlers filed out of the barn, many nodded respectfully to Swift, though some still maintained deliberate distance. "That went better than I expected," Thomas commented as they began the walk home under a sky brilliant with stars. "Your knowledge made an impression, Swift." "Knowledge isn't always enough to overcome prejudice," Swift replied realistically. "But it's a beginning." Eliza, walking between them with occasional support from both men as her ankle tired, felt a curious mixture of hope and apprehension. Will the broken spur actually listen to settler concerns? "Dalton is practical, despite his prejudices," Swift answered. "Avoiding stampedes saves cattle and men. Financial arguments may succeed where moral ones fail." The conversation continued. As they neared the Blackwood homestead, Swift providing insights into the ranching operation that helped Thomas refine their approach. The exchange felt remarkably normal, three adults discussing a community problem as equals. Yet Eliza remained acutely aware of how extraordinary this simple interaction would appear to many of their neighbors. At the cabin, Thomas invited Swift inside for coffee before his ride back to the line camp. The invitation, extended without hesitation, spoke volumes about Thomas's evolving perspective. No longer was Swift merely the man who had rescued his daughter, but a person whose company and conversation were valued for their own sake. As Thomas busied himself with the coffee pot, Eliza found herself momentarily alone with Swift near the doorway. The lamplight cast soft shadows across his features, highlighting the strength of his profile against the darkness beyond. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for coming tonight, for sharing your knowledge despite how you were received." Swift turned toward her, his dark eyes reflecting the lamplight. "I came because you asked," he replied simply. "Your father's welcome was unexpected. The settlement's partial acceptance is even more so." The quiet statement carried implications that made Eliza's heart beat faster. That he had faced potential hostility because she asked meant more than elaborate declarations might have from another man. "Will you really serve as liaison?" she asked. It could be difficult standing between worlds. Something like resignation mingled with determination crossed his features. "I've stood between worlds my entire life, Eliza. At least this time, the position might serve some purpose beyond my own survival." The use of her given name, without the formal Miss Blackwood, felt intimate in a way that transcended physical proximity. It acknowledged a connection that had evolved beyond rescuer and rescued, beyond the conventional boundaries of their different worlds. Before she could respond, Thomas returned with coffee, and the moment passed. Yet something had shifted between them, a tacit acknowledgement of feelings neither was prepared to name, but both increasingly recognized. As Swift prepared to leave an hour later, declining Thomas's offer to stay the night despite the late hour, Eliza followed him onto the porch. The spring night had turned cool, and she wrapped a shawl around her shoulders against the gentle breeze. "The settlement meeting is only the beginning," she said, watching as he checked his saddle straps with practiced movements. "People's minds don't change quickly." Swift straightened, regarding her thoughtfully. "True change comes slowly, but small shifts accumulate, like water cutting through stone. Tonight was a small shift. Will you come again?" The question emerged more vulnerable than she had intended. "To check on the ankle, I mean. Medically speaking." The hint of a smile touched his lips, warming his usually solemn expression. "The ankle appears to be healing well, but yes, I'll come again, perhaps to discuss the liaison arrangements with your father." They both recognized the professional excuse for what it was, a reason to return that would raise minimal objections from neighbors already gossiping about Swift's presence at the Blackwood home. As he mounted his buckskin, Eliza impulsively stepped forward. The yarrow should be blooming again soon by the creek. I'll need to gather more once my ankle permits." Swift understood her meaning immediately. "That area can be dangerous for solitary gatherers. Perhaps you should have company when you return." "Perhaps I should," she agreed, a smile spreading across her face despite her efforts at composure. With a nod that carried the weight of promise, Swift turned his horse toward the eastern horizon and his distant cabin. Eliza watched until his silhouette disappeared into the darkness, aware that the settlement meeting had marked not just a potential shift in settler-rancher relations, but a defining moment in her own life's trajectory. Inside, she found her father, sitting thoughtfully by the fire, his expression suggesting internal debate. He looked up as she entered, studying her face with the perceptiveness that had always made hiding things from him nearly impossible. "He's a remarkable man," Thomas said finally. "Not what I expected." Eliza sat beside him, choosing honesty over pretense. "No, he's not what anyone expects. That's part of why he's remarkable." Thomas nodded slowly. "The settlement won't easily accept what I think might be developing between you two." The directness of the observation startled her, though perhaps it shouldn't have. Thomas Blackwood had always possessed unusual insight, particularly regarding his children's hearts and minds. "I'm not certain what's developing myself," Eliza admitted, staring into the flames. "But I know it feels important, significant." Thomas placed his hand gently over hers. "Your mother would say that significant things rarely come easily, but that doesn't make them less worth pursuing." The simple statement, invoking Rebecca's wisdom, brought unexpected tears to Eliza's eyes. "You're not opposed?" To Swift River, specifically? No. He's proven himself a man of integrity and intelligence. Thomas squeezed her hand gently. "To the difficulties you would face? I worry, naturally. The world can be cruel to those who challenge its boundaries. Like you and Mother did, educating a girl beyond what was considered proper." Thomas smiled at the comparison. "Perhaps, though our choices raised eyebrows, not potential violence." His expression sobered. "Be certain, Eliza, not of society's approval, but of your own heart. The former may never come. The latter must be strong enough to compensate." As Eliza climbed into bed that night, her father's words echoed in her mind, alongside memories of Swift's quiet strength and unexpected gentleness. The path forward remained uncertain, fraught with complications neither could fully anticipate. Yet something had undeniably begun, a connection across worlds that challenged the very foundations upon which frontier society constructed its rigid hierarchies. Whether that connection could survive the pressures it would inevitably face remained to be seen. But Eliza fell asleep with a sense of possibility that transcended conventional limitations. A feeling not unlike the moment she'd first spotted Swift's approaching figure after the stampede, when hopelessness had suddenly given way to unexpected salvation. Spring unfurled across the Oklahoma Territory with vibrant determination. Fields that had lain dormant through winter now burst with fresh crops, creek beds swelled with snowmelt from distant mountains, and wildflowers painted the prairie in swaths of color. For the settlers of Redstone Creek, spring brought renewed hope alongside familiar challenges, the eternal struggle to coax sustenance from untamed land. For Eliza Blackwood, the changing season mirrored her own transformation. Her ankle had healed completely, allowing her to resume normal activities, yet something fundamental had shifted within her. The stampede and its aftermath had awakened perspectives she couldn't return to dormancy, much like seeds that, once sprouted, could never again be contained within their shells. 3 weeks had passed since the settlement meeting. True to his word, Swift River had spoken with Dalton, the Broken Spur trail boss, securing a reluctant agreement to alter future cattle drive routes and establish communication protocols with the settlers. This diplomatic achievement had softened some attitudes toward him, though suspicion lingered among those most entrenched in their prejudices. Swift had visited the Blackwood homestead twice more under the legitimate pretext of coordinating between ranchers and settlers. Each visit deepened the connection between him and Eliza, though both maintained careful propriety in public. Their conversations ranged from practical matters of frontier survival to philosophical discussions about the complex interactions between different cultures across the territory. On this particular morning, Eliza rose before dawn, drawn outside by the first light painting the eastern horizon. Her basket hung from her arm. Today, she would finally gather the medicinal plants she had been forced to neglect during her recovery. The yarrow would be flowering abundantly now, along with echinacea and other valuable herbs that grew near. The creek where the stampede had occurred. "You're heading to the creek?" Thomas asked, appearing in the doorway with a coffee mug in hand, his educator's perception missing nothing of his daughter's intentions. "Yes, our medicine stores need replenishing," Eliza replied, adjusting her wide-brimmed hat. "William's allergies are beginning, and Mrs. Peterson asked for more of grandmother's cough remedy for her husband." Thomas sipped his coffee thoughtfully. "The creek where you were caught in the stampede. The same creek where Swift River mentioned. He'd be checking fence modifications this morning." Heat rose to Eliza's cheeks at her father's gentle teasing. "The plants grow best there," she defended, though her slight smile acknowledged the convenient coincidence. "Take William with you," Thomas suggested, his tone light but eyes serious. "Not as a chaperone, I trust both you and Swift, but because neighbors talk. Your reputation matters, particularly now." Eliza nodded, understanding her father's concern. The settlement had begun accepting Swift's professional contributions, but personal relationships across racial boundaries remained taboo. "I'll wake him now." William proved surprisingly eager for the expedition. Once Eliza promised he might practice the tracking skills Swift had begun teaching him. By the time they reached the creek, the sun had cleared the horizon, bathing the landscape in golden light that transformed dewdrops into diamonds scattered across the prairie grass. The creek area had recovered remarkably from the stampede's destruction. New growth had softened the trampled earth, though attentive eyes could still discern the path the panicked cattle had taken. Eliza directed William to search for yarrow on the north bank, while she examined the southern side, where echinacea typically flourished. She had been gathering for perhaps half an hour, her basket gradually filling with carefully selected plants, when William's excited voice called from upstream, "Eliza, horse tracks, fresh ones!" She straightened, shading her eyes against the morning sun to spot her brother gesturing enthusiastically from atop a small rise. Smoothing her skirts, she moved toward him with deliberate calm that belied the quickening of her pulse. "Single rider," William reported with the seriousness of a military scout, "heading east to west along the creek. Passed here maybe an hour ago." "Very observant," came a deep voice from behind them. William's face lit up as Swift River emerged from a stand of cottonwoods, leading his buckskin gelding. "I knew it was you. The left front shoe has that chip in it, just like you showed me." Swift nodded approval. "Good eye. Details matter in tracking. That chip could identify my horse among 100 others." His gaze shifted to Eliza, something warming in his typically guarded expression. "Gathering medicines?" he asked, noting her basket. "Yes. The stampede destroyed my usual patches, but new growth looks promising." She indicated several flourishing yarrow plants nearby. "William's been helping identify the best specimens." Swift dismounted, securing his horse to a nearby sapling. "Your brother has a natural talent for observation, useful for both tracking and plant gathering." William beamed at the praise. "I've been practicing like you said, looking for patterns, not just obvious signs." While William proudly demonstrated his developing skills, Swift moved closer to Eliza, his voice lowering. "I was hoping to see you. Today, Dalton received word from the ranch owner. Some decisions have been made that affect the settlement. Good news or concerning? Eliza asked, noting the conflicted expression that briefly crossed his features. Both, perhaps. The Broken Spur is establishing a permanent outpost near Redstone Creek, year-round presence, not just during drive seasons. Eliza absorbed this information, immediately recognizing both opportunities and complications. A permanent ranching presence could bring economic benefits to the settlement through trade and employment. It might also intensify existing tensions between ranchers and farmers over land and water rights. "And you?" she asked, the question carrying weight beyond its simplicity. Swift's dark eyes held hers steadily. "I've been offered management of the outpost. Permanent position, not seasonal work." The implications sent a cascade of emotions through Eliza. Hope that Swift might remain nearby indefinitely, concern about how the settlement would react to his appointment, and a deeper, more personal question about what this development might mean for their increasingly significant connection. Before she could respond, William called out excitedly, having discovered a patch of rare blue sage that Eliza had been seeking for months. The moment of private conversation ended as they joined the boy in examining his find. Yet the unspoken question hung between them, awaiting future discussion. They spent another hour at the creek, Swift assisting their gathering by identifying several medicinal plants Eliza hadn't encountered before, Kiowa healing traditions that complemented her grandmother's knowledge. William absorbed every word, his natural curiosity transcending any cultural barriers that might have influenced an older person. As midday approached, Swift announced he needed to continue his fence inspection duties. "The settlement committee meets tomorrow at Cooper's place," he reminded Eliza. "I'll present the outpost plans then." "We'll be there," she assured him. "Father believes the outpost could benefit everyone if relationships are handled carefully." Swift mounted his horse with characteristic grace, looking down at Eliza with an expression that communicated far more than his measured words. "Until tomorrow, then." As he rode away, William tugged at his sister's sleeve. "You like him, don't you? Not just as a friend." Children's directness could be startling. Eliza considered deflecting the question, but opted for modified honesty. "I respect Mr. River greatly. He's a man of exceptional knowledge and integrity." William rolled his eyes with the impatience of youth. "That's not what I meant, and you know it. You look at him the way Mary Jenkins looks at Timothy Cooper when she thinks no one's watching." Heat rushed to Eliza's cheeks. "William Blackwood. That's quite enough commentary on matters that don't concern you." "I think it's fine," William continued, undeterred. "He knows important things, treats us with respect, and saved your life. Pa likes him too. Who cares if he's half Indian?" The simple wisdom, from a 10-year-old's perspective, struck Eliza deeply. If only adult society could adopt such straightforward evaluation based on character rather than heritage. "Many people care very much about such things," she explained gently. "The world isn't as sensible as you are." William shrugged, already distracted by a butterfly fluttering past. "Well, they're foolish then. Can we check the persimmon trees on the way back? The blossoms should be opening." With that abrupt transition, typical of children, the conversation ended, yet William's innocent observations lingered in Eliza's thoughts as they completed their gathering and headed homeward. Baskets full of healing plants, and her mind filled with possibilities both exciting and daunting. News of the planned Broken Spur outpost reached Redstone Creek before the official announcement, traveling through the settlement with the remarkable speed that important information always achieved in small communities. By evening, Thomas Blackwood returned from town with reports of heated debates already forming among the settlers. "Some see economic opportunity," he reported as they prepared supper. "Others fear ranchers encroaching on farmland. And when they learned Swift River might manage the operation," He shook his head. Opinions are sharply divided. Because of his heritage? Eliza asked, though she already knew the answer. Primarily, Thomas acknowledged, though some objections disguise themselves as concerns about his youth or experience. Samuel Jenkins seemed particularly agitated. Samuel Jenkins, as the settlement's unofficial leader and largest landowner, wielded significant influence over community opinions. His support or opposition could determine how the outpost proposal would be received at the following day's meeting. Jenkins has always been fair-minded, Eliza observed, slicing cornbread with more force than necessary. Surely he sees the potential benefits. Thomas regarded his daughter thoughtfully. Jenkins's nephew arrived from Texas last month, hoping to establish himself here. I suspect Samuel had ambitions of developing relations with the cattle outfits. The implication was clear. Swift River's appointment potentially interfered with Jenkins's plans for his nephew's advancement. Personal interests rather than racial prejudice might drive his opposition, though the latter provided convenient justification. Tomorrow's meeting will be contentious, Thomas warned. Be prepared for difficult conversations. Some may question your support for Swift given your acquaintance. Let them question, Eliza replied with unexpected steel in her voice. I'll stand by what's right, regardless of personal connections. Thomas smiled slightly at her determination. You're your mother's daughter in spirit, Eliza. She too believed principles mattered more than popularity. The comparison to her mother strengthened Eliza's resolve. Rebecca Blackwood had faced criticism for teaching literacy to the household, held back in Illinois, believing education should transcend social boundaries. If her mother could withstand social pressure for her convictions, so could Eliza. The settlement meeting the following afternoon drew nearly every adult in Redstone Creek. The Cooper Barn, the community's largest gathering space, felt uncomfortably crowded as settlers positioned themselves based on opinions about the outpost proposal. Those favorably inclined sat near the front, those opposed clustered near the back, and the undecided occupied the middle ground, literally and figuratively. Swift River arrived precisely at the appointed time, neither early enough to appear eager nor late enough to suggest disrespect. He had dressed with careful consideration. Clean, well-maintained clothing that reflected practical frontier sensibilities while incorporating a finely beaded belt that subtly acknowledged his Kiowa heritage without flamboyance. Eliza, seated with her father in the middle section, felt a flutter of admiration at Swift's composed entrance. Despite the whispers and stares that followed his progress toward the front of the barn, he maintained a dignified bearing that neither apologized for his presence nor challenged those who might object to it. Samuel Jenkins called the meeting to order with obvious reluctance. We're gathered to discuss the Broken Spur's proposal for a permanent outpost near our settlement, he announced. Mr. River will present the details, after which we'll open for questions and discussion. Swift moved to the central position with measured confidence. For the next 20 minutes, he outlined the proposal with remarkable clarity, the outpost's planned location, its staffing and operations, and most importantly, the potential benefits to Redstone Creek settlers. These included preferential cattle pricing for local consumption, employment opportunities, and a regular market for excess crops to feed ranch hands. Throughout his presentation, Swift emphasized cooperation rather than competition between agricultural and ranching interests. The land chosen for the outpost lay in a rocky area unsuitable for farming, but with good water access that wouldn't diminish settlers' supplies. The timing of cattle movements would be coordinated to avoid interference with planting and harvest seasons. When he finished speaking, a thoughtful silence hung briefly over the gathering before Jenkins reluctantly opened the floor for questions. The discussion began reasonably enough, with practical inquiries about specifics of the arrangement, but gradually shifted toward the underlying tensions many had anticipated. Why should a half-breed oversee operations so close to our homes and families? Demanded Harold Wilson, a recent arrival from Tennessee, known for particularly rigid views. The broken spur has plenty of white hands who could manage things. A murmur ran through the crowd, some expressing agreement, others discomfort with the bluntness of the question. Swift remained composed, but Eliza noticed the slight tightening of his jaw before he responded. The broken spur selected me based on 5 years of service, knowledge of both ranching operations and local conditions, and my proven ability to communicate effectively between different groups, he stated evenly. My heritage gives me perspective on multiple worldviews, which the owners consider an asset in this position. Before Wilson could continue, Martha Peterson spoke up from her seat near the front. I'm more concerned with competence than heritage. Will this outpost keep their cattle from trampling my vegetable garden like last season? The practical question redirected the conversation temporarily, allowing Swift to demonstrate his thorough understanding of cattle management and boundary maintenance. Several farmers asked additional questions about grazing patterns and property protections, which Swift answered with specific, actionable information rather than vague assurances. The discussion might have continued productively had Jenkins's nephew Clyde not risen from his seat at the back. Tall and broad-shouldered, with the aggressive confidence of youth, he projected his voice to carry throughout the barn. Let's address what everyone's thinking, but not saying plainly. This isn't just about an outpost, it's about this Indian having designs above his proper station. First managing ranch operations, then calling himself equal to white settlers, and now, his gaze fixed deliberately on Eliza, pursuing interests that threaten the natural order of decent society. The accusation hung in the air like a thunderclap. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd as all eyes turned toward Eliza, whose face flushed with both embarrassment and anger at the public insinuation. Thomas Blackwood rose immediately to his feet. That accusation is inappropriate and unfounded. Young man, my daughter has conducted herself with perfect propriety in all interactions with Mr. River, whose assistance saved her life during the stampede. We all know she spent a night in his cabin, Clyde persisted. Now she advocates for his appointment with suspicious enthusiasm. The connection seems clear enough. Before Thomas could respond, Eliza stood, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Mr. River found me injured and freezing to death. He provided medical care and shelter during a life-threatening storm. My support for the outpost proposal is based on its merits for our community, not personal considerations. Swift remained outwardly calm during this exchange, though those who knew him well might have noticed the dangerous stillness that had come over him, not the relaxed composure he typically projected, but the coiled tension of a man restraining powerful emotions. When he finally spoke, his voice carried quietly but with unmistakable authority. My private character and Miss Blackwood's reputation are not relevant to the business proposal before this meeting. If personal attacks are the strongest argument against the outpost, perhaps its benefits are more substantial than opponents wish to acknowledge. The strategic redirection partially defused the situation, though the damage to Eliza's reputation had already begun. Several older women exchanged meaningful glances, while younger men studied her with new, speculative interest that made her skin crawl. James Cooper, uncomfortable with the turn the meeting had taken in his barn, attempted to restore order. Let's return to the actual proposal. Specific questions about operations, please. The discussion resumed with superficial civility, though undercurrents of tension remained palpable. When the meeting finally concluded 2 hours later, the settlement had reached tentative acceptance of the outpost itself, while reserving judgment on Swift's management role, pending further consultation with the Broken Spur owners. As people filed out of the barn, Eliza found herself isolated in a way she had never before experienced. Women who had previously sought her herbal remedies and friendship now guided their daughters pointedly away from her vicinity. Men tipped their hats to Thomas, but pretended not to notice his daughter standing beside him. Only Martha Peterson approached directly, her wizened face set in determined lines. "People's memories are shorter than they think," she told Eliza quietly. "My own grandmother married a Cherokee man back in Georgia. Family disowned her for 2 years, then welcomed her back when her medical skills were needed during a fever outbreak. Truth and usefulness eventually overcome prejudice." The unexpected support from the settlement's eldest member provided momentary comfort, though Eliza knew the coming days would be difficult. Public suspicion, once aroused, rarely subsided quickly, particularly when inflamed by those with personal interests at stake. Swift approached as the crowd dispersed, maintaining a respectful distance that nonetheless triggered renewed whispers among those watching. "I apologize," he said quietly to both Blackwoods. "My presence has complicated your standing in the community." "You have nothing to apologize for," Thomas replied firmly. "Ignorance and prejudice are not your responsibility." Eliza met Swift's concerned gaze directly. "I knew the potential consequences when I supported the proposal. I stand by that decision." Something shifted in Swift's expression. A deepening of respect mingled with another emotion more complex and personal. "Few would accept such consequences voluntarily. Few things of value come without cost," she replied, echoing her father's earlier wisdom about significant relationships. As they parted ways outside the barn, maintaining proper public decorum, despite the damage already done to Eliza's reputation, an unspoken understanding passed between them. The settlement's reaction had forced their private connection into public awareness before either had fully defined its nature or implications. Now they would need to decide whether to retreat from that connection in the face of social pressure, or to acknowledge and perhaps deepen it despite the challenges such a choice would bring. Riding home beside her father in thoughtful silence, Eliza found clarity emerging from the turmoil of the day's events. The artificial boundaries between people, maintained through social pressure and prejudice, seemed increasingly insubstantial compared to the genuine understanding and respect she had found with Swift River. If society would judge their connection, regardless of its true nature, perhaps defining that nature based on their own hearts rather than external expectations, made the most sense. Thomas seemed to sense her internal resolution. As they approached their homestead, he spoke quietly. "Whatever path you choose, Eliza, remember that worthwhile journeys rarely follow established roads. Your mother and I will support you, even when others cannot understand your direction." The simple affirmation, acknowledging her adult agency without dictating its application, represented perhaps the greatest gift a father could offer a daughter navigating uncharted territory. With it came the freedom to follow her conscience and her heart, even if doing so led away from conventional safety toward uncertain but potentially more meaningful horizons. The days following the settlement meeting unfolded with predictable, yet painful consequences for the Blackwood family. Sunday services at the small community church provided the first public test of Eliza's new status. Families who had previously greeted her warmly now maintained cool distance, mothers guiding daughters away, as if impropriety might be contagious. When Eliza took her usual place, helping with the children's Bible lessons, Reverend Miller quietly suggested that, under the circumstances, perhaps Mrs. Cooper might assume those duties temporarily, until the situation resolves itself. he explained awkwardly, unable to meet her eyes directly. Eliza surrendered the position with outward composure that masked her inner hurt. The children, at least, showed no awareness of adult prejudices, several calling out disappointed goodbyes as she left the small classroom area. Only Martha Peterson maintained her regular friendship, deliberately sitting beside Eliza during the service in silent solidarity that spoke volumes to the watching congregation. The elderly woman's support carried particular weight, given her status as a founding settler whose deceased husband had helped establish Redstone Creek 15 years earlier. "Hold your head high," Martha murmured as they left the church. "I've watched this settlement turn against good people before, then welcome them back when convenient. Weather the storm with dignity." Meanwhile, Thomas Blackwood faced his own consequences. Several families withdrew their children from the informal educational sessions he conducted 3 afternoons each week, citing vague excuses that poorly disguised their true concerns about his apparent acceptance of Swift River's connection to his daughter. "As if knowledge becomes tainted depending on who sits at my table," Thomas remarked with uncharacteristic bitterness after the Jenkins family collected their children's books and slates. The most painful rejection came from the settlement's collective reliance on Eliza's healing skills. For 2 years, she had tended fevers, bound wounds, eased childbirths, and prepared remedies for everything from croup to rheumatism. Now, even as spring illnesses circulated through Redstone Creek, no one appeared at the Blackwood door seeking her assistance. "Mrs. Wilson's youngest has a whooping cough," William reported after returning from an errand in the settlement. "They've sent for a doctor from Fort Reno instead of asking for your syrup." Eliza absorbed this news with resignation. Fort Reno lay 3 days' ride away. The child would suffer needlessly, waiting for medical help that she could provide immediately. Yet pride and prejudice now outweighed practical considerations in the community's decision-making. Through these social adjustments, Swift River maintained deliberate distance from the Blackwood homestead. His absence, while painful to Eliza, demonstrated his understanding of frontier social dynamics and genuine concern for her family's standing. The settlement might eventually forgive a young woman's temporary indiscretion if the relationship appeared to end. Continued association would cement their censure permanently. A week passed with no word from Swift, though Eliza occasionally glimpsed distant riders near the proposed outpost location where preliminary construction had begun. She focused on homestead tasks with determined energy, channeling frustration into productive labor rather than self-pity. The garden expanded by nearly half its previous size. New shelves appeared in the root cellar, and her collection of dried medicines underwent complete reorganization. "You don't need to prove anything," Thomas told her gently, finding her still working well after sunset one evening. "I'm proving it to myself," Eliza replied, continuing to sort dried yarrow blossoms with meticulous care. "That I can endure disapproval without breaking." The second Sunday after the meeting brought unexpected activity to the Blackwood homestead. As Thomas and the children prepared for church, Eliza begged off, unwilling to face another morning of public shunning. She stood on the porch, watching her family depart, mixed emotions washing through her, relief at avoiding immediate scrutiny, shame at her own cowardice in hiding, and a deeper pain at the injustice of being ostracized for nothing more than seeing value in a man whom others judged by heritage rather than character. No sooner had the family wagon disappeared over the small rise that separated their property from the main settlement road than movement caught Eliza's attention from the opposite direction. A rider approached from the east, Swift River, on his distinctive buckskin gelding. Her first impulse was to retreat inside to protect both of them from further gossip should anyone witness his visit. Yet something in his determined approach suggested an important purpose beyond merely seeing her. She remained on the porch, one hand unconsciously smoothing her hair, wishing she wore something more presentable than her faded work dress. Swift dismounted with his usual fluid grace, securing his horse to the hitching post before approaching. Though his expression remained composed, Eliza immediately noticed the tension in his movements and the unusual formality in his bearing. "I apologize for coming unannounced," he said by way of greeting. "There are matters we should discuss before. Decisions are made that cannot be unmade." "My family is at church," Eliza replied, understanding his concern about propriety. "But we can sit here on the porch, visible to anyone who might pass by." Swift nodded agreement, taking the offered chair with measured movements that suggested inner conflict despite his outward calm. For several moments he studied the distant horizon, organizing his thoughts before speaking. "The broken spur owner arrived yesterday from Texas," he began finally. "He reviewed the outpost plans and met with Samuel Jenkins privately." "And?" Eliza prompted when he paused. "The outpost will proceed as planned, but my appointment as manager has been reconsidered." Swift's voice remained level despite the obvious disappointment this decision must represent. "Jenkins's nephew Clyde will oversee operations instead, with me serving as foreman, responsible for the actual work, but reporting to him." Eliza felt a surge of indignation. "That's absurd. Clyde knows nothing about ranching. He's barely been in the territory for 3 months. He knows the right people and comes from the right background," Swift replied simply. "In the owner's view, he'll integrate better with the settlement community." The unfairness burned in Eliza's chest. Swift's competence, experience, and proven abilities counted for nothing against prejudice and social connections. "This is because of me, isn't it? Because Clyde implied there was something improper between us." Swift met her gaze directly. "Partly, though such an outcome was always possible, regardless of personal connections. The territory operates by certain unwritten rules about who may hold positions of authority." His acceptance of this injustice without apparent bitterness struck Eliza powerfully. Swift had navigated similar boundaries his entire life, learning to expect less recognition than his abilities merited simply because of his mixed heritage. "It's wrong," she stated with quiet intensity. "Yes," he agreed simply. "But it is the reality we face." The subtle shift to "we" rather than separate individuals caught Eliza's attention immediately. Swift hadn't come merely to report workplace disappointment. Something more significant lay behind this visit. "There's more," she observed rather than asked. Swift nodded, tension visible in the set of his shoulders, despite his composed expression. "The arrangement creates a difficult position. Working under Clyde after being promised management will be challenging. His temperament suggests he'll use his authority to assert dominance rather than build cooperation." "You're considering leaving," Eliza realized, unexpected pain lancing through her at the thought. "The J-Bar outfit in the Cimarron Valley has offered a position," Swift confirmed. "Better terms, management role, fewer complications." The Cimarron Valley lay over 100 miles northwest, not an impossible distance on the frontier, but far enough to make regular communication nearly impossible. If Swift accepted this position, their connection would effectively end. "When must you decide?" Eliza asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. "I rode to give them my answer tomorrow," Swift replied, watching her face carefully. "They expect acceptance." Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken feelings and possibilities. Swift had deliberately come before making his decision final, offering Eliza input into a choice that would affect them both. The implicit question hung in the air. Was whatever existed between them worth preserving against significant obstacles, or would both fare better returning to their separate worlds? "And if you stayed?" Eliza finally asked. What would that mean? Swift considered his response carefully. Difficulty, Working under a man who dislikes me personally and resents my abilities. Living near a settlement that largely rejects my presence. Facing continuous criticism for any association with your family." He paused, then added with quiet intensity, "but also possibility, of building something meaningful despite opposition, of creating understanding where prejudice currently prevails." "And between us?" Eliza pressed, needing clarity about the personal rather than professional dimensions of his potential decision. For the first time, Swift's carefully maintained composure softened, revealing genuine vulnerability beneath his guarded exterior. "Between us, I see something rare and valuable, a connection based on mutual respect and understanding rather than conventional expectations." His gaze held hers with unwavering directness. "I would explore that connection further if you wished for it, regardless of social disapproval." The simple declaration, devoid of flowery sentiment but profound in its honesty, moved Eliza deeply. Swift offered no false promises about easy paths or guaranteed outcomes, only the truth of his feelings and willingness to face difficulties if she shared his sense of their potential together. "The settlement's reaction would not improve," she acknowledged, thinking through practical realities. "My family would continue facing social consequences. Your position would remain difficult." "Yes," Swift agreed. "I present these realities, not to discourage, but to ensure any choice is made with a clear understanding of its implications." Eliza rose from her chair, moving to the porch railing where she could view the distant settlement, the small church where her family currently sat among neighbors who had rejected her, the Cooper barn where accusations had publicly linked her name with Swift's, the scattered homesteads whose occupants now avoided her healing skills despite previous reliance on them. What value did such conditional acceptance hold compared to the genuine connection she had found with Swift? The community had shown how quickly surface welcomes could transform into rejection when conventions were challenged. Yet her family remained steadfast, and Martha Peterson had demonstrated that at least some settlers valued character above conformity. "I don't want you to leave," she said finally, turning back to face him. The simple statement carried the weight of decision, not just about his employment, but about their shared future. Something transformed in Swift's expression, a lightening of burden, a cautious hope replacing resignation. "You understand what that choice might mean for both of us? I understand that paths worth taking rarely follow established roads," Eliza replied, echoing her father's wisdom. "And that I would rather face difficulty alongside someone of genuine integrity than accept hollow approval from those who value conformity above character." Swift rose, moving to stand beside her at the railing, close but not touching, respecting property even in this private moment of connection. "The road will not be easy. Few worthwhile journeys are," she countered with unexpected lightness. "You once tracked me through a raging storm when most would have waited for better conditions. Perhaps that determination extends beyond physical challenges to social ones as well." A rare smile transformed Swift's serious features. "You survived a stampede and nearly froze to death. Social disapproval seems a lesser obstacle by comparison." The moment of shared humor broke the remaining tension between them. Whatever difficulties lay ahead, they would face them with clear understanding of both challenges and possibilities, neither minimizing obstacles nor allowing them final authority over personal choice. Swift did not stay long after their decision took shape. Propriety still mattered, particularly now that they had chosen a path that would invite additional scrutiny. They agreed he would speak with Thomas directly before finalizing arrangements with the Broken Spur, respecting her father's position even though Eliza had made her own choice clear. As Swift prepared to depart, he hesitated briefly before reaching into his saddlebag and withdrawing a small leather pouch. "This is for you," he said, handing it to Eliza. "My mother made it before she died." Eliza opened the pouch carefully to find a beautifully crafted bracelet of polished seeds, small carved, wooden beads and delicate leatherwork. "It's beautiful," she breathed, recognizing the significance of such a personal gift. "Kiowa women wear such things to signify important transitions," Swift explained. "This marked my mother's decision to join my father's world while maintaining her own traditions. She said I would know when to pass it on." The gift represented far more than a simple adornment. It acknowledged parallel journeys across cultural boundaries, choices made despite social opposition, and the preservation of identity within new contexts. Eliza slipped it onto her wrist, the unfamiliar weight a tangible reminder of the path she had chosen. "Thank you," she said simply, words inadequate for the emotion behind them. Swift mounted his horse, the decision to remain bringing new purpose to his bearing despite the challenges it would entail. "I'll return once I've spoken with the broken spur owner. Your father should hear my intentions directly." As he rode away, Eliza touched the bracelet, its smooth beads and intricate leatherwork, connecting her to a heritage she was only beginning to understand, but now chose to honor alongside her own traditions. The settlement's rejection had painfully severed certain relationships, yet in their place emerged the possibility for deeper connections, transcending conventional boundaries. When Thomas and the children returned from church an hour later, they found Eliza waiting with quiet determination, and the visible symbol of her choice on her wrist. William noticed immediately, his youthful directness addressing what the adults might have approached more cautiously. "That's Indian work," he observed, examining the bracelet with curious fingers. "Did Swift River bring it?" "Yes," Eliza answered, simply meeting her father's questioning gaze over the boy's head. "He came to discuss some important decisions. He'll return to speak with father directly, but I wanted you all to know my mind is made up." Thomas studied his daughter's face, finding there the same quiet resolve that had characterized her mother's most significant choices. "I suspected as much when Martha Peterson mentioned seeing a rider heading toward our property as they left church." He smiled slightly. "She quite deliberately mentioned it within Clyde Jenkins's hearing, I believe." The news that their decision was likely already circulating through the settlement brought no regret to Eliza. Let them talk. Their speculation and judgment seemed increasingly irrelevant compared to the authenticity she had found with Swift. "It won't be easy," Thomas cautioned, though his tone conveyed support rather than discouragement. "No," Eliza agreed, touching the bracelet that symbolized her commitment to a path few white women had walked successfully. "But difficulty and worthiness often travel together." Henry, listening to this adult conversation with limited comprehension, contributed his own perspective with childish wisdom. "Swift River knows how to find paths nobody else can see. He followed tracks in the rain to find Eliza when she was lost. He can probably find a way through people being mean, too." The simple observation brought unexpected smiles to both Thomas and Eliza. Perhaps the boy had articulated the essential truth that would guide them through the challenges ahead, finding paths invisible to those limited by conventional thinking, tracking possibilities where others saw only obstacles. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the Blackwood homestead, Eliza felt a curious peace despite the uncertain future. The stampede that had nearly claimed her life had instead set her on a journey of discovery, not just of Swift River and his remarkable qualities, but of her own capacity to choose authenticity over acceptance, possibility over security. Whatever storms might gather on their horizon, they would face them together, finding tracks that others could not see. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.